Welcome to the Steelers Breakdown Podcast. He's Steelers Penn Live beat reporter Nick Farabaugh, and I'm John Luciew, and we are convening the podcast little more than 2 weeks out from the NFL selection meeting, and all eyes of Steeler Nation are on what their favorite football team will do with that 21st pick. Could one of the quarterbacks, Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, or Jaylen Milroe fall to the Steelers at that number 21 spot? Will they take a blue chip defensive lineman, as many prognosticators are predicting, or will they trade down and stock up on draft capital to retool their football team? We're going to pick Nick's brain with all of those questions and much more. But first, Nick, like you were just commenting before we went on the air, that this is kind of the dead hours before things really start heating up with the draft. So I got to ask you to take us into the day of a life of a Steelers beat reporter. What are you doing? Are you watching film? Are there any mock drafts that you particularly put stock in? Anybody out there that you follow? When wild rumors start being reported, anonymous sources of what the Steelers are going to do at 21, what do you take with a grain of salt, and what do you try to run down and report on? Give us a little the next 2 weeks for you. What's it going to be like? What are you going to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, watching final film, I think, is big. I always film's a big part of how I do this. It's how I form a lot of my opinions. It's how I form a lot of interactions, even with guys in the locker room or people that I talk to in the organization. It reveals a lot of things and it starts a lot of things. But I think there are three big things I look at over the next 2 weeks. And one of them is kind of sifting through the trash. I remember when we were in free agency, right before then, we were talking about how you had to sift through the garbage to try and find parcels of truth. Same thing with the draft, man. It's smokescreen season. Teams throw them. They try to kind of dodge it. You follow their actions. That's how you do this to me. You have to follow what they are doing. You have to follow their actions, who are they bringing in for visits, their pro day movements, and sometimes what they say in public to you, in a press conference is not what they think. Now, you could take away some things, I think, generally, but I think you also look at the history of how they draft. If you have, for the Steelers, when you have Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin and Andy Weidel, you have, drafts upon drafts to kind of work with. 2 drafts for Khan. You have Weidel's time with the Eagles, and obviously Tomlin has been here forever. So you have data to work with in past years. So you got to look at things that are consistent. So that's a big part of it. I'm just kind of figuring things out. This is, 30 visit season. These teams are bringing in guys every day now for pre-draft visits. The Steelers are bringing in guys every day to the UPMC Rooney Sports Complex. We know 17 of those for sure. I believe we know 21 that have been reported, plus I believe 4 local visits now that they have set up. So we are kind of finding that out, I think, putting together that idea. And then, when we're talking about mock drafts and the ones you really pay attention to, mocks are hard. They are. Mel Kiper just released his last mock draft today. I know some people say he doesn't know things, but if you actually look at the mock drafts and who's the most accurate, he's one of them. And so it's bore out through the stats.
Tell us who he has the Steelers taking and why, and what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, he has Derek Harmon to the Steelers, which I think makes sense. Now, the Steelers haven't shown like a lick of interest in Derek Harmon the entire draft process. We'll get into this, but this is why, 2 weeks out from the NFL draft, everybody's kind of questioning what they thought, right? Everyone was like, oh, it's going to be defensive line, but where have the first round defensive linemen been? That's been the question for the Steelers this entire time. Now, we'll talk about it, but Harmon would be a really good fit. I think he's very much in the mold of a Stephon Tuitt type of player. He's like a charging bull, man. He is super strong. He's got real upside to play anything from 3 to 5. You probably even dart him inside a 2-eye if you really wanted to. He's a really fun player. I think he fits what the Steelers do well. So if they were looking for the Cam Hayward replacement route, he makes a lot of sense. But I'm not so sure they are. I don't think that what their actions have shown is saying that they're looking at that type of defensive line prospect. So I would like Harmon, but I'm not so sure it's going to line up with them. And then, the other two I kind of really pay attention to in terms of prognosticators, Daniel Jeremiah. I respect DJ a lot. And then Dayton Brugler from The Athletic. Those are kind of the two guys I really look at. We'll hear rumors come out. You got to kind of sift through that. But really with the Steelers, I mean, they don't hide who they're interested in. So you just kind of got to decode the way to go about it. This year it's a little murkier because they've been a little more all over the place in terms of their interest, and because they don't have a second round pick, I think it makes it that much more murky, right? I think it's even harder to kind of nail down where they're going. So there's a lot of players I think they're clearly interested in, but they have like 6 or 7 different routes they could go right now.
Okay. There is sort of a broad stroke sort of insight into the plight of a beat reporter as this draft looms. Now, you said sifting through the trash. I do a lot of that myself. It's called Steelers social media. And some of our viewers ask where I get some of my crazy questions. Well, I look at what people are saying on social media, and I raise some of those questions with Nick just to get Nick's professional and well considered and well reported perspective on these. And here is one of those. A lot of people in the 412 are making a big thing about the fact that Alabama QB Jaylen Milroe has accepted an invite to Green Bay to be there on stage as a prospective number 1 pick in the draft. These guys who accept think they're going in the first round. They don't want to be sitting around to day 2. So some in Steelers Nation are saying, well, this is a sign that, the Steelers are perhaps signaling to Milroe's people that he could be in play at 21. What do you think of that scenario?
I mean, it is interesting because they made the list more exclusive this year, which means that the NFL, at the very least, believes Milroe has a chance to go round 1. Milroe believes he has a chance to go round 1. This is by no means a slam dunk. We have seen guys that are quarterbacks accept this invite. Malik Willis, Will Levis come to mind, and they have obviously fallen much further than this. Will Levis was there on day 2. Malik Willis didn't even go to the 3rd round. So it's happened many times before. Just because you get the invite does not mean you are 100% a slam dunk first round pick. Even in the exclusive invite world, I think it doesn't mean that. He's a quarterback. There's drama, right? If he falls, could a team come up and get him late in the first round? I think that's the other thing here is, I don't think it's necessarily as much. I think the Steelers, really are the start of Milroe's range. I don't really think they're the end of it. I think, 21's where I can first see him going off the board. Maybe 20 if you get a team that loves him and trades up in front of the Steelers. But, that's a Browns, a Giants, the Saints, some team like that poking back into the back end of the first round to come and get him. More than I think the Steelers are kind of a threat to take him here. I think the Steelers like Jaylen Milroe, and I think they do. But I don't think they like him at 21. I don't think they do. If they were going to take Milroe in the first round, I think it would at least have to be a trade back scenario, but I don't see that happening. Now, there's a few interesting threads to Milroe's interest that differentiates himself from others, from guys like Jackson Dart, Tyler Shuck, Will Howard. The Steelers had seen him at the Senior Bowl. They met with him at the Senior Bowl. He had an interview with them at the Combine, and then they went and had him dinner with him in Tuscaloosa. They had dinner with multiple Alabama prospects, so it's not just Jaylen Milroe. Remember when that was reported? They had a dinner with Jaylen Milroe. Guys, there were about 4 or 5 other prospects at that dinner. This is what the Steelers do when they go to pro days. They bring multiple players, even if they're not interested or going to draft them. It's for future reference. I remember they did this with Will Anderson years back. Obviously, Will Anderson, they had no shot of getting. He was in the top 3 pick. And so I want to cool that. But there's two things that kind of stuck out to me about the Milroe interest. One, this is the only pro day stop quarterbacks coach Tom Arth made. I thought that was really interesting. He went to Alabama to see Jaylen Milroe. He didn't go to see Shuck. He didn't go to see Dart. He didn't go to see Shedeur Sanders. He didn't go to see any of Will Howard, Riley Leonard, whatever. Arthur Smith was also there, so the fact that Arth came along is interesting. I think that is a clear sign of interest. The other is, so far, we don't have a 30 visit from Jaylen Milroe. Now, they've met with him on 3, really 4 different occasions, so maybe they feel like they've done all the homework they can on him. But even in the past, when we've seen guys like Broderick Jones, Joey Porter Jr., others come in that they have extensively met with and scouted over the process, they still end up coming to Pittsburgh for that 30 visit. So if the Milroe interest is super strong, at some point over the next 2 or so weeks, he should come to Pittsburgh for a visit. We'll see if that ends up happening. But right now, I think Milroe is this really fun toolsy player, and I think people probably are a little too harsh on him. I understand the questions about his accuracy. I understand the questions about his game. The tape is raw. He's working with Jordan Palmer, a QB guru right now, to rework his mechanics. And I think this is kind of a selling point for him is, over from the Senior Bowl to the Combine to his pro day, he's gotten better as he's reworked his mechanical base. It's looked better. The accuracy's improved as he started to kind of rework his mechanics. This guy's obviously a great athlete. He's a very high character player. In terms of intangibles, he might be the best intangible quarterback in the class. His intangibles are through the roof. His leadership's through the roof. In terms of interviews I did this cycle, the very first interview I did for the draft cycle was when I was in Mobile, Alabama, and I talked to Jaylen Milroe. I'm not sure it was top. I think he was so impressive. I can see why a team would buy into Jaylen Milroe. And we have seen this kind of brand of quarterbacks that, are raw mechanically, but need work start to kind of trickle through the draft and work out if they sit a year or two. Josh Allen's obviously the biggest example of this. But I even think of guys like Jordan Love who have at least kind of checked that box in some respects. So that's why teams are going to talk themselves into Milroe. But I really think while the Steelers like him, I don't think they like him like that. I don't think they're going to sit at 21 and take Jaylen Milroe. In fact, I think Jaylen Milroe has a pretty good chance of playing for their rivals. I think he's got a really good chance to play for the Browns. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Cleveland Browns to go after Jaylen Milroe in 33, because it doesn't sound like they're going to take Shedeur Sanders at 2. And if I were them, they have holes across their team right now. If I were them, I would definitely look at kind of filling out my roster rather than trading back into the first to try to get Milroe, unless it's just a minimal climb. They do have the 33rd overall pick, so they don't have to go far if they end up trying to get up into the first for him. But he has a few connections there too. His former offensive coordinator at Alabama, Tommy Rees, is now with Cleveland Browns, so there's a lot of questions about Milroe, but the Browns have a lot of answers, I think, to those that maybe other teams won't. So I think he makes sense there. I think the Steelers like Milroe, but I don't think they like him as a first round.
Great perspective on him. And it is very intriguing situation with him coming to that draft and the Browns sitting there at 33. Interestingly enough, the Steelers sat at 32, the first pick of the second round, when they stood pat and went with Joey Porter Jr. And we're going to talk about him and who's going to be coaching him up a little bit later in the show. But we got to go to Nick with more of these draft commentary linking the Steelers and what they're going to do. The next one's coming from Adam Schefter, who says there's only one QB the Steelers would take in round 1. Says Schefter, quote, "I was of the mind that Pittsburgh was not taking a quarterback in round 1. I think the only quarterback that they would consider, me reading between the lines, would be Shedeur Sanders," unquote. What do you think of that?
I think Shedeur is the ultimate wild card of this group. I have no idea how to read the Steelers' thoughts on Shedeur. So I'll give you the perspectives. First of all, from what I've heard, they are going to have a pre-draft visit with Shedeur Sanders. He's going to come to Pittsburgh for a pre-draft visit, just like Jackson Dart did, just like Tyler Shuck did. So he'll tick that box off. They did have a combine formal with him at the combine. It wasn't reported at the time, but they did talk to him at the combine. Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan did have a combine formal with Shedeur Sanders. So there's 2 points of interest. But, and I'll give you 2 other points that kind of stick out to me, and it sticks out with Dart too when we're talking about Jackson Dart, and basically a first-round quarterback, period. Mm-hmm. They didn't send Mike Tomlin or Omar Khan to Dart or Sanders' pro day. Whether it was Big 12 Pro Day or the Colorado Showcase last week, they sent a scout, Kelvin Fisher. And even then, you think maybe Tom Arth would be there, right? Maybe the quarterback's coach would be in Boulder to see him. That was not the case either. At least you would send Arthur Smith or something. Neither of those boxes were checked. And so it's weird to me to think the Steelers would draft a quarterback they didn't go see in person. They didn't take out to dinner like that. But I do think there's points of interest with Shedeur Sanders. And so it's interesting because the Steelers' profile, and we'll talk about this when we talk about other positions too, specifically the defensive line, the profile of their pro day travel this year has not really lined up with a lot of the consistent ideas you would have with what they would go in the first round. There's really only about 2 or 3 prospects that fit into what they do that you would fit. Matthew Golden is one of them, the wide receiver from Texas. He checks like every box for interest, traditional interest. Malachi Starks, the DB from Georgia, he checks just about every box. He hasn't had a 30 visit yet. We'll see if he gets to that. But there's not a lot. And so I think you need to expand your definition of what interest means for the Steelers this year. It's a little hard to figure out. And so Sanders is very interesting. I think he is a fascinating player. He could go anywhere from 2 to he could go to the late first round. I mean, he's got such a wide range of outcomes. It doesn't sound like kind of how more and more you hear about it. It doesn't sound like he's going to go to the Browns. It doesn't sound like he's going to go to the Giants. It sounds like the Browns are going to go either Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, and whichever one doesn't get picked by the Browns will be a Giant. And then after that, I mean, the New Orleans Saints at 9 are kind of the next team, but they have a lot of needs. They don't necessarily have to take a quarterback. And after that, is there anyone that's going to stop Shedeur Sanders from falling to 21? Now, there could be. Remember when I talked about trading up? The Giants, I think, taking Travis Hunter at 3 and then trading up ahead of the Steelers at 20, because the Broncos, to me, feel like a team that could definitely trade out of that pick at 20th overall. If the Giants come up, they could easily pair Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter together. I think that's a very appealing option. We've seen a lot of teams do the top wide receiver, top quarterback thing. We've seen that happen. So I think that's an appealing option for them. But if he falls to 21, I think we're having a very interesting discussion, John. I don't think a lot of teams necessarily anticipated this, but as the process has started to kind of bear itself out, it's become more and more possible. Like, I don't think it's Looney Tunes to suggest Shedeur Sanders is there at 21 anymore for the Steelers. I don't think it's necessarily the likeliest scenario, but we will kind of see. I think, they've shown as much interest in Sanders as they have in Dart. So if you're saying that they're going to draft Sanders, I also think you have to at least give kind of your gratitude to Dart as well, because they have shown interest in Jackson Dart. He did come in for a 30 visit. They did send assistant general manager Andy Weidel to the Ole Miss Pro Day, and while I don't think it was necessarily just for Dart, because they have a bunch of guys, Trey Harris, JJ Pegues, Walter Nolan, that's another one that you can throw on the board for the defensive line. They have a lot of different other players, but they have shown interest in Jackson Dart. They had a combine meeting with him. They met with him at the Senior Bowl. Like, there's points of interest as well with Jackson Dart. But Shedeur Sanders is kind of this kind of wild card option that I think flies in the face of a lot of traditional interest for the Steelers. And, when it comes down to Dart, Milroe, not Milroe because I saw Milroe in person, but when it comes to Dart and Sanders, I just have a hard time believing the Steelers wouldn't send the house to the pro days. I do. I know they've loosened up kind of their terms on that a little bit, especially with Troy Fautana last year when they only sent Pat Meyer to his pro day. But I have a hard time seeing with the quarterback position and where they've been that they wouldn't at least go there and take him to dinner or see him live in person. I think that one, me, is just a little bit, like they could do it. It could be their way of smoke screening. But the Steelers have never been a team to be super subtle about their positional interest. Back in 2022, they did kind of fake people out. Everyone thought that they would probably take Malik Willis, and they ended up taking Kenny Pickett. But everyone knew they were going to take a quarterback, right? Like, that wasn't the question. This year, when they did that in 22, they went on a whole world tour. They went to Willis's Pro Day. They went to Corral's Pro Day. They went to Howell's Pro Day. They went to Pickett's Pro Day. They went to Malik Willis's Pro Day. They went all those Pro Days that year just to scout out these quarterbacks. I feel like that is the one thing that is not sitting right with me when we're talking about quarterback in round 1. It can't be ruled out. It can't be completely gone. I've talked to you about this throughout the cycle, how I've heard that isn't really their preferred option. But when you don't have a quarterback that you can 100% trust on the roster, things can change sometimes. And I think there's at least a chance of it. But I also think there are signs that tell me, man, would they really not go to these pro days and put in all this work for the quarterback position? I think for other positions, it's a little bit more liberal, right? You can kind of feel freer to draft the offensive tackle than a quarterback. And this quarterback obviously would mean so much to the Steelers. So if they really believe in Shedeur Sanders like that, I would imagine not only do they bring him in for a 30 visit, I would imagine they then have a pre-draft workout, a private workout at some point with Shedeur Sanders, and maybe we get reporting of that to happen. But there are different points of interest I have to see personally to fully buy into the idea of a round one quarterback, period. I think out of Dart, Milroe, I like Shedeur the best. I like his tape the best personally, but I have questions about a round one quarterback given some of their actions.
Great way to phrase it. And I like how you read the book on Milroe, where Steelers like him a lot, but not at 21. And then this idea of the two quarterbacks falling to 21, you're leaning probably no. And for what it's worth, your colleague, Mark Caboli, says even if Shedeur and or Jackson Dart fall, that he believes they're going to pass as well. There was an interesting note from Steelers reporter Mike Nicastro trying to do similar, like you, reading the tea leaves of all the Steelers' usual checking the box with visits and the pro days and the 30 visits, and he made this observation. I just want to run it by you because it kind of made me stop and think. He posted on X, quote, "Does anyone else think the Steelers pre-draft visitors feel a bit off? It's generally a clear correlation to who they are interested in early on. Could they be prepping for a trade down?" End of quote. Because you gave me this sense of like it's harder to read this time, and obviously he's picking up on some of that. Is this the prelude to a trade down where they don't make a move in the first round, or they move to late in the first round, or high in the second?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that you can rule that out. And here's the thing, the Steelers have really put an emphasis on these 30 visits under Omar Khan. I mean, you look at who they've drafted. I mean, I'll just throw out some names. Broderick Jones, Keanu Benton, Joey Porter Jr., Darnell Washington, all were 30 visits. Last year, Troy Fautanu, Mason McCormick, Zach Frazier, Peyton Wilson, all 30 visits. Like, there has been a clear indicator of these mattering to them. A lot. Logan Lee as well was a 30 visit. So they match, like these match up not just in the first round, but down the draft board. And I've kind of pointed this out before when I mentioned guys that hit multiple points of interest, mainly the combine formal, the pro day, whether that's a position coach, Tomlin Kahn, etc., and then the 30 visit are generally guys that get drafted by the Steelers. For example, Fautanu had a combine formal, Pat Myers pro day, and then had a 30 visit. Okay, that made sense, right? Jones had the pro day, the combine formal, a 30 visit. So their last two first round picks have these 3 points of interest. And that's kind of where I kind of delineate where this happens. And so for the Steelers, there's only 3 players right now that meet the 3 point of interest. It's wide receiver Matthew Golden, it's wide receiver Jaden Higgins, and it's safety Nick Emanwori. So that's kind of interesting. It is kind of odd, right? 2 wide receivers, one of which in Golden, who is probably not going to get past 21. Like if they're going to take Matthew Golden, they're going to have to take him at 21. Jaden Higgins, who would be, probably an early second, late first round pick type player. He's definitely a trade back guy. And Emanwori, who is just kind of this curveball, like the safety interest the Steelers have shown this year has been the most perplexing part of this entire cycle. They have shown a lot of safety interest, and Emanwori has 3 points of interest. Combine formal, DB's coach Jared Alexander's pro day, and now a 30 visit. He fits the criteria for a pick. Like, it's interesting when you think of those. And so, yeah, it is a little bit kind of, in terms of first round picks, I would only consider Golden, Dart, and Emanwori slam dunks on the visits. Shedeur Sanders is probably another one because he is coming to Pittsburgh. So, but he doesn't have the 3 points of interest. Dart doesn't have the 3 points of interest that I talked about that have mattered historically to the Steelers. And then other guys, you have guys like Azareye'h Thomas, Trey Amos. These guys make some sense for the Steelers, but they are kind of early second round corners, late first round corners. And so the trade back idea makes a lot of sense. And Omar Khan, at the owners' meetings did say they were going to keep the kind of book open. They would have options to do what they wanted to. And I think not having that second round pick, it's eating at them a little bit. I think they want one more pick. And so I can easily see them trying to move back. Now, it's going to be hard for them to move back in this class because the quarterback kind of idea doesn't really work with them, right? Because why would a team trade up with them for the quarterback? Because they would be the team theoretically they'd be trying to get in front of. And after the Steelers, there's not really a lot of quarterback option for teams. And if you're the Browns or the Giants, I could trade up to 30 instead of 21 and give up way less. And so it's going to be tough for them to trade back. It is, but maybe there's a player, at a non-quarterback position that's there that a team really loves and wants to trade up for. And so I think that's what the Steelers are going to kind of have to hope for. The other thing, there are two other things that stick out on the 30 visit list for me. One, their extreme interest in early round wide receivers. I mean, we're not talking about, fourth, fifth rounders. We're talking about day 2 picks and round 1 guys. We're talking about Matthew Golden, Jaden Higgins, Savion Williams, and Jalen Noel. I mean, those guys are top 100 picks. It's interesting. And if you're reading the tea leaves on that, it tells you the Steelers are either long-term planning for what happens with George Pickens after this year, or they're having contingency plans, or et cetera, right? There's a reason why they're scouting wide receivers like that. And then the other thing is there's just not many early defensive tackles. They've hosted 5 defensive tackles for visits so far this year. They've hosted Jamari Caldwell, Elijah Roberts, Joshua Farmer, J.J. Pegues. And then they are also reported to be hosting another one with Yaya Black. All those guys are round 3, round 5-ish guys. Where's Kenneth Grant? Where's Derek Harmon? Where's Walter Nolan? I mean, where's even, Darius Alexander in that list? Now, it can come, and I expect at least 1 or 2 of those guys to pop up over the next 2 weeks. But the lack of overt interest in round 1 defensive tackles has been very interesting to me, to say the least. So there's a lot of interesting things about this visitors list. I think trading back is very appealing to the Steelers. I can't say they're going to have an easy time doing it. This class, and this is something I think that's been under-discussed among the Steelers fan base, this class is not really loved by the NFL. And specifically what I mean by that is the top of it. There's not a lot of blue chippers that are viewed here. There's about 2 or 3 blue chip prospects that people view as they're going to be going in the top 10. And a lot of teams only have like 10 or 15 first round picks. Like they only have about 10 or 15 first round grades. So when you get to the Steelers at 21, really a lot of teams are going to be looking at that and saying, you're taking a second round prospect. And say one of those first round kind of prospects fell to 21, to me, it's hard to see the Steelers passing on that guy. If I'm talking about those first round, like a guy like Tetairoa McMillan, if he falls to 21, I have a hard time seeing the Steelers pass on him. If, there's an outside curveball's chance that you get a guy like Ashton Genty falling to 21. Again, it's really hard to see the Steelers passing on a guy like that. So there is a lot of very interesting visits kind of weaved into this. Shamar Stewart, the edge rusher from Texas A&M, is the weirdest one, but they've shown interest all over the map. And they've shown a lot of mid-round interest in running backs, receivers, and D-line, which makes sense. The early round interest, that first round, it's kind of all up in the air. And so what it makes you think is the Steelers are really going through their options. They're looking at who they can look at, but a lot of these guys definitely do look like trade back scenario kind of guys. And so I think it is a fine read into that. I think they would love to trade back. I just look at the draft and how the league values this and say, man, I think it's going to be a little hard to trade back if you're Pittsburgh.
That was a gold mine of information, and I totally agree. I think if you're going to do business for one of the quarterbacks who fall, you're going to do it at 20, not 21. because you're going to want to get in front of the Steelers because of all these rumors about them needing, well, it's not a rumor. They need a quarterback, a long-term quarterback for sure. So they would definitely be on the table. So yeah, you're going to do business at 20, not 21. And the other analysis that's spot on is the fact that the draft from 20 on, like you said, there's not it's kind of even in terms of the talent. So why would you give up picks to come up to 20 when there's going to be equal talent, later on there? You're not going to get the pick. You're not going to get that second round pick that the Steelers probably do really covet, and they're looking at their contingency plans. But I don't see the scenario where that happens either. So that's going to be really interesting to see which player that the Steelers love falls to them, because I do think they're going to make the pick at 21. So who do you think that is? I mean, if you had to size it up now and sort of, I know there's countless scenarios, but how do you see it playing out at 21 for the Steelers?
Yeah, I mean, I've said this man's name throughout the process, and I still think it. I still think Kenneth Grant's the guy. I do. I think Kenneth Grant is the guy they want at 21. Now, there's no guarantee he stays on the board. I think that's the thing. He's very talented. He's got extremely high upside, and teams are going to love that. And there's a lot of defensive line needy teams. Now, this is interesting. Walter Nolan, the defensive lineman from Ole Miss, who is just a freak show at times on tape and has some character concerns that teams are flagging him for, has been visiting with a lot of teams way above the Steelers' range. We're talking from picks 8 to 17, so he could easily be off the board, which could mean he's the second defensive lineman off the board. From there on, then you have Derek Harmon and Kenneth Grant. Is a team going to jump on Kenneth Grant if Nolan goes early? I think that's the question. And so Grant fits a lot of what the Steelers have looked at in this draft. These 5 defensive linemen they have scouted specifically for 30 visits have a few things in common. I'll throw Shedeur Stewart in here as well because he's a different type of player. He's more of he's an edge rusher that can play 5 tech at times, but he's really an edge rusher. But here's what I'll say about these 6 guys. They are really kind of those tweener types, think DeMarvin Leal, or they're nose tackles. That's the interesting thing. So I'll just go through the guys. Jamari Caldwell, J.J. Pegues, and in my opinion as well, you look at Yaya Black, and all 3 of those guys are nose tackles. Joshua Farmer can do different things. He's the most versatile up and down the interior line to me. He can play 5, he can play 3, he can come inside to 1. He can do a lot of different things. So he's a fun player for them. He fits, I think, most into the Haywardy mold. He's probably more to it but he fits into that mold. I think he would be a base end for them and could play 3 tech in their sub packages. So he's really the only one that's true just base end and in. Elijah Roberts, the defensive lineman from SMU, is edge in, but he can play edge really into the 3 tech, which is a little interesting. And then you have Shedeur Stewart, who can play kind of edge in to 5, but is more of a true edge rusher. So all these defensive linemen kind of have that nose tackle or that tweener feel outside of Farmer. And without a true kind of strong interest in Derek Harmon or Walter Nolan, I think the Steelers want that nose 3 tech type. Because I think ultimately, personally, what I think the Steelers would like to do is kick Keanu Benton out of the nose tackle position and out to 5 tech and 3 tech. He plays 3 tech already, of course, in the sub packages, in the nickel packages, he plays there. But when you look at where the Steelers are kind of adding to this room, I think it's going to be instant run defense, and then they're going to have somebody else try to kind of come in there in sub packages and spell them at times. So you can have a rotation with Cam Hayward, Benton, and those guys. I think Kenneth Grant has the ability to be that nose tackle that also shifts out to 3 tech and sub packages. Reminds me a lot of DJ Reader. That is very much who he reminds me of. DJ Reader was a guy coming out who was very much a nose tackle first, but then became an explosive pass rusher that really relied on his power. I think that's what Kenneth Grant can do. I think he fits what the Steelers like. He's athletic. He's a high motor guy. He fits a lot of things for them. And they were going to go to his pro day. You know, they didn't end up going to his pro day. Mike Solomon and Omar Khan didn't. Terrell Austin was there, which is, I think, notable enough. But they were going to go there, but then Aaron Rodgers came to visit Pittsburgh, and that's why they weren't in Michigan Pro Day. That thing was thrown together very fast. The Steelers had their credentials and were set to go to Ann Arbor before Aaron Rodgers called them up and said, "Can we do this visit?" Rodgers set that visit up, by the way, not the Steelers, which I thought was really interesting. But so they were going to be there for Kenneth Grant's Pro Day, and he's proing. I do believe he's coming for a 30 visit. Not this week, but next week. So he'll check the boxes, I believe, for your first round interest. He had a combine formal. I think by draft time, he's going to meet all three of those criteria we laid out. I think he's going to end up being the pick for them. I think in round one, if he's gone, though, good. The Wild West is your best question. If you want me to name who the second likeliest is, I don't know, Golden maybe, Emeka Egbuka, someone like that. Probably receivers where I would go, but man, if Grant goes off the board, who knows? But right now, I'm still sticking with it. Kenneth Grant is the guy they ultimately select at 21.
All right, and we have 2 more weeks of deep dive draft analysis from Nick coming, but I want to sort of give a couple of quotes that I found on Steelers social media to show what is at stake. All the landmines, the pitfalls, the fool's gold that's embedded in any draft, and certainly the Steelers have not been good in the last maybe 5, 6, 7 years with a lot of their drafting. The first comes from Alex Kozora, who gives us this on Twitter. Quote, with Kenny Pickett long gone, the Steelers do not have any fifth-year option decisions this year. The last first-round Pittsburgh drafted, who they exercised the fifth-year option on, was T.J. Watt, who was selected in 2017. And then Daniel Valente offers this perspective on some of the Steelers' recent picks. Kenny Pickett, first-rounder in 2022. Chase Claypool, second-rounder in 2020. Devin Bush, first-rounder in 2019, and yes, they traded up for him. Terrell Edmonds, first-rounder in 2018. And Artie Burns, a first-rounder in 2016, have combined for 30 starts total since leaving the Steelers and moving on to other teams. So there's some recent first-rounders that certainly didn't pan out in Pittsburgh. Any just thoughts on just how much pitfall, fool's gold, lack of development, whatever you want to call it, that has led to some of these outcomes, Nick? I mean, and of course, a lot of this was under Omar Khan's predecessor. I think all of it that we mentioned here was under his predecessor. But certainly, as much rep as the Steelers had about building through the draft and all those 70s draft that were, just full of Hall of Famers, they fell on hard times of late. How do you sum it up?
I mean, look at who has been given a first round, a second contract with them from their first round picks. And not only that, just having their fifth year options. I mean, the last fifth year option the Pittsburgh Steelers picked up was TJ Watt. I think that speaks volumes. That is a easy baseline for if that pick was successful. I mean, let's look at their picks, right? The Steelers draft history, we don't even have to just, start at 2019. Now, you can start there because the trade up for Devin Bush, I think, is a good starting point of where things really started to go off the rails. But even earlier than that, I mean, you have guys like Jarvis Jones, you have Artie Burns, you have that really rough stretch, I think, starting from 2013 onwards. And some of it, for me, is not the Steelers' fault. So they have this really great stretch from 2010 to 2012, where their first round picks are Cam Hayward, Marquise Pouncey, and David DeCastro. I mean, 3 hits, 3 Pro Bowlers, great draft. But then 2013, Jarvis Jones. I mean, that is obviously a miss. 2014, Shazier, I think a hit. Unfortunate what happened with his career, but that ended up being, just a 4-year draft pick. 2015, Bud Dupree. I think that's an interesting one to evaluate. Didn't really break out till year 4 or 5. But they did end up tagging him and picking up his fifth-year option. I'd call that a successful pick, probably. But 2016, I mean, you have Artie Burns. That's a tough miss. Then Watt, obviously, huge hit. 2018, Terrell Edmonds. 2019, Devin Bush. Claypool in 2020, the first-round pick was Minka. In 21, you have Najee Harris. In 22, Kenny Pickett. It's a tough one to kind of swallow because for me, the Steelers missed largely on many of those picks. And you can look at it even down the draft, in a lot of those drafts, not a lot of guys. I think even 2019 onwards, I think Mason Rudolph is still on the team, but outside of TJ Watt, I believe Mason Rudolph is the only guy from 2017 through about the 20 draft that is still on the team. It's just not great, right? So 2017, you have TJ Watt still on the roster. 2018, you only still have Mason Rudolph. 2019, there is not a single draft pick from the 2019 NFL draft class still on the roster. Deontay Johnson to get a second contract. 2020, the only guy left on the roster is Alex Highsmith. 21, you still have Pat Fryermuth and Isaiah Loudermilk, but the rest of that class is gone. In 22, currently just about the entire class, sans the two QBs, Kenny Pickett and Chris Oladokun are still on the roster. But it's been tough, man. That 21 through 2017 stretch, really 2018, has really come back to bite them. And that when you talk about why the Steelers are having to kind of stockpile picks and they have all these needs, that's why they're really starting, with kind of this cupboard that has to be rebuilt across the roster. And so that is a big part of it. They don't really have a lot of guys that they can lean on from those past drafts. And so that is exactly why Omar Khan coming into the situation he did, it was a tough situation right from the jump because all those draft misses, the last two drafts that Kevin Colbert had, I mean, clearly weren't great drafts. They weren't, out of those guys in 21, you do have two guys that get second deals, but Loudermilk's a rotational D lineman, is even going to make the team, and I think Pat Fryermuth is a good pick. But it's really tough, man. It was a tough draft period there from 2018 through 21. Really 22, I think the 22 class is going to bear out to not be great either. And so hopefully for the Steelers, 23 and 24 bear more fruit. I think there's promising signs there, but we'll see. I think year 3 is going to be big for how much that 23 class blossoms. And 24, obviously, a lot of questions with how many injuries there were in that class. We'll see how that kind of works out.
This is why it matters, folks. This is why we spend so much time on the draft. It is full of potential superstars, but lots of duds. Now, one player who is going to get some extra coaching to make sure that he is a star, not a dud, is Joey Porter Jr. And that coaching is going to come courtesy of the new Steelers cornerback, Darius Slay, who said he's been analyzing Porter Jr.'s game and some of his aggression that has led to a lot of pass interference penalties, almost panic penalties when he's covering deep or, down in the end zone. Slay said this about his work that he's going to do with Joey Porter Jr. Quote, "I'm going to make sure to get him right. I told him I watched him. He does that clinch in step where he gets in. Now he's just got to work on being better down the field." Now, Slay promises he's not going to sap Porter's aggression, but just make it more calibrated. Quote, "It's hard to get that aggression out of somebody like that, which is cool. That's what you want. You'd rather take that than tell him to be aggressive. In other words, you don't want to teach him to be aggressive. You can be like, hey, man, calm down a little bit. It's going to be fun working with Joey," says Darius Slay. And maybe that's a reason why Tomlin likes veteran quarterbacks, especially when he has an up-and-comer like Porter Jr., who does need to refine his game. Your thoughts, Nick, as we close out this episode?
Yeah, I mean, veteran leadership matters in locker rooms. Veteran mentors matter. Ask anyone. Ask any superstar in the NFL, and they will probably point to some veteran, a player that helped them at some point. And it doesn't even have to be like a superstar, but Darius Slay obviously is a star. And Slay's one of the more patient corners in football. So he is a very different type of corner than Joey. And listen, there was a really crazy stat. So the Steelers were one of the lowest penalized teams defensively last year. I think they were only called for 31 penalties defensively. Joey Porter Jr. had 16. 16 of those. I mean, that is a lot of penalties on one guy on your defense. And I think there are so many positives about Joey's game. I think he's a very high character player. I think he wants to compete and he's in with the physicality. You know, what Darius Slay's kind of talking about with the aggression is Mike Tomlin's. This is Tomlinism. He'd rather say whoa than sick him, right? What that means is he'd rather you be aggressive and have to tone it down than have to get the aggression out of you. Like, that's part of what that means. And that is a textbook kind of usage of that phrase, I think, with Joey Porter Jr. He does need to be more patient at the line of scrimmage because I think sometimes he just creates unnecessary penalties, doesn't trust his technique, and I think his technique's good. Like, I don't think this is he panics because his technique sucks and he wouldn't be able to survive otherwise. I think he's shown that he can when he trusts himself. I think there's got to be some trust in himself. And I think, when you talk about Porter, man, it's going to be all about how can you get better at the catch point, because that's where he does panic. Is sometimes he's in good position and he would get a PBU. I think the biggest one that sticks out to me, you remember last year, there were 2 penalties when they went to Cincinnati, and there was one where Burrow just kind of had a heave and pray throw to Andre Yoshivas, and then Porter just tackled him, and they put him on the end zone, basically, and they got a touchdown out of that. I mean, he was right in perfect coverage. He would have broken it up. There was another one down the sideline where he's in perfect coverage, staring at the ball, and he's going to break it up, and T. Higgins is going up for it, but Porter's got it, and then he just yanks him down, and it's DPI. There's things like that where Joey needs to tone it down a little bit. And so having veteran mentorship like Darius Slay, who's so good at that, that is one of the best things about his game, I think is really helpful. And this is why veteran mentorship matters. It matters across the league, teaching little nuggets, teaching things that can help, a young corner like Joey Porter Jr. And Joey did take a step back in 2024. He was great in 23, but 24, he was definitely more rocky. He took a step back. So they need him to be really good. That corner room needs Joey Porter Jr. to return to where he was in 23 and be that cornerstone piece that they can really trust. And I think Slay's mentorship will really help that.
Big year for Joey Porter Jr., and it's a good thing we have Darius Slay to take him under his wing. And, of course, we'll be back next Tuesday as the draft will be even closer, and we're going to go into more of what the latest rumors, and we'll have Nick debunking everything that's crazy about the Steelers social media that I dig up, and we'll have lots more of news and maybe even, some Aaron Rodgers. We really didn't talk about him this week. We gave you a break on him, but we'll see what he's up to next week as well. So stay tuned. Be back for the Steelers Breakdown podcast every Tuesday.